But now, we have Evan Brumley, where we will be working out how to pick the right third-party packages for your project. Let's make Evan feel welcome.
All right, awesome. So, g'day, my name's Evan Brumley. I'm the software engineering lead at WSP Digital in Melbourne. And today I'm going to be talking about this little guy. So pip install, like if you look at any Python tutorial or particularly Django tutorials, the time to pip install can usually be measured in minutes. It's one of the first things that we have beginner programmers do. And it's not necessarily the safest thing. So today I'm going to be talking a little bit about packages and how to pick the right one. So let's start with a little case study. So it's February 9, 2023. My crypto wallet is empty. My Web3 enterprise is ruined. My apes are gone. Can anyone take a look at my requirements.txt and tell me what's happened? No, Django REST framework is actually not supposed to have dashes. That will catch you out. That's caught me out in the past. But you're on the right track. The actual one is matplotlib. That should be matplotlib. I've made a typo. And that typo has cost me dearly because on February 9, 2023, some bad actors uploaded about 400 and something packages to PyPI of common misspellings of packages. And matplotlib was one of them. Those packages tended to be revolving packages that were to do with the crypto community or packages that crypto people use. And the cost of installing matplotlib for me was that a browser extension was downloaded and installed on my machine, which quietly switched out crypto addresses on my computer clipboard. So when I went to copy one cryptocurrency address, it switched it with the attacker's cryptocurrency address, and I sent my apes to someone in North Korea. There is a really great write-up. I'd suggest having a look at that link. They go into quite a lot of detail about what happened. But the point I'm trying to make here is that packages are not necessarily safe. They have a lot of power. They have the same power that your application has. Using other people's code is the riskiest thing you can do in software engineering, short of writing your own code. So this talk is about how we can manage that risk. In this talk, I'm going to be presenting a framework. This is kind of the way I think about packages when I'm picking the ones to install. I'm just going to start with talking a little bit about identifying your project's risk profile, which is basically determining your appetite for risk in packages. I'm going to talk very briefly about architectural fit, so how to pick the right packages for your project from a purely technical, do they do what they should be doing perspective. And then I'm going to talk about risk from a few angles. So licensing risk, security risk, maintenance, and quality risk, and I'll go through those in detail. I'm going to talk about finding alternatives, and then I'm going to talk about if you can't find alternatives, how do you mitigate the risks that packages present. So let's start off with risk profiles. So what is a risk profile? I'm kind of defining it as a frank assessment of the dangers that your app will face in the wild and the dangers that your app could pose to others. This could be a formal document, something that you put together. If you're working in a big project, your project manager might be involved. You write up a big PDF and present it to your stakeholders. Or if you're working on a personal project, this could be a super informal thing. It could be just a picture in your head and an understanding that you have. The most important thing is that once you establish your risk profile, you should be sharing it with everybody on your team. Everyone on your team needs to have a firm understanding of this. So here's some kind of examples of where projects can fit on a risk sort of continuum. These are just some sort of categories that I've dreamed up, nothing official, but just a starting point for how to think about risk. So a low risk project might be a personal project, some proof of concept code, something that's not on the public internet, but something that has kind of a short lifespan. So something you're not going to be supporting super long term. You'll then work up through medium to high risk as your app moves onto the public internet or a local corporate intranet. As the length of time that you're going to be supporting this app increases, you're going to have to be starting to think more carefully about the packages that you incorporate into your app and the effects that they're going to have long-term and on security, etc. And we move all the way up into the extreme risk category. Let's say you're working on government projects or military projects. If you have a high volume of sensitive or personal information, particularly if you have vulnerable users, for whom if data got out, then that would be a huge problem and cause significant issue. Or if there's a high likelihood of targeted attack, if your app is likely to be targeted by bad actors, specifically looking directly at your app and trying to break it, then you kind of fall into that extreme risk category, and you should be being extraordinarily careful with any application code. Doing full review. So why do you need one of these? A risk profile forms up the basis on which you'll weigh up all of your risk-related decisions for your project. It's important to communicate this carefully with all of your team, because risks may not be immediately clear to everyone on your team. Especially in a standard project, you'll have junior team members, senior team members, people who come from different experiences. So it's really important that all of those risks are fully understood by absolutely everyone, because they may not be obvious. Final point here, teams can sometimes sleepwalk into high-risk situations with their applications. When you're picking your packages, you'll pick 90% of your packages in the first week of a project's lifespan. And if you haven't already thought about your risk profile, then you may find that it's too late. And projects can sometimes also move from low to high risk over their lifetime. So continually revisit your risk profile. So I'm now going to talk a little bit about architectural fit. And I'm not going to go into huge detail here, because this is basically sort of, it's a skill that you'll build up over time. And there's an awful lot to take in. But I'm just going to give you a few sort of questions to think about. The first question, the most important one from my perspective, is do you really need it? People have this view of building Django applications as kind of constructing applications out of Lego. You look at the way Django projects are formed, and they're sort of, it's apps. You have apps, and if you want to do, if I want to-dos, and I'll install a to-do app. I'll go out and find a to-do app on the internet in a package. But a package is not always the right fit. So it might be a trivial bit of functionality that you could do in a few lines of code. It might be something that isn't really architectural best practice. There's an awful lot of Django dash something packages out there that are combining things in weird and wonderful ways. And maybe you should think about looking at it holistically, looking at best practices, and doing your research, more research than just Googling for a package. Next, look at whether you'll be using this package correctly. Are you using this package as the authors were intending it to use? If you use a package in a unique and unexpected way, do not be surprised if a minor update breaks it in a unique and unexpected way. Number one rule of programming, don't get clever. So make sure that you're using it as intended, that you're not hacking it together, and if you do have to hack something together for whatever reason, document it incredibly carefully and make sure that that is known to everyone on the project, that you've accepted that risk. Lastly, have a look at how will it affect your code base. Many packages have very strong opinions over how you should integrate them, how you should code around them. In some cases, that's a really good thing. Think Django. Django is a framework. It guides you to the best practices. But some packages will guide you in different competing directions. So take a holistic view of your application. Look at all the other packages that you have installed and how what your team's best practices are, and make sure that the package is actually going to be enforcing the right patterns for your project. Good dependencies tend to solve difficult problems like cryptography or web frameworks. They tend to have clear and ring-fenced responsibilities. As I mentioned, they do the job they were specifically designed to do in your application, and most importantly, they leave your application room to grow. So they open doors rather than close doors. As I mentioned, this is a core architectural skill that comes with experience. So do deep research, look beyond just Googling for packages, expect to make mistakes. Every single application developer will have that one thing that they installed that they really wish they hadn't. And ask for help. Because this is a skill that's gained over experience, reach out to your fellow developers, come to conferences like this, talk to people, ask people how they solve particular problems, and really rely on the experience of others to learn. Okay, so now moving on to analysing the actual risk from a package. I'm going to look at sort of 4 types of risk: licensing risk, security risk, maintenance, and quality risk. And I'm going to look at these ones in turn and how to identify these risks and how to gauge the levels of risk on particular packages. So I'm going to start with another case study. So I've just launched my startup with $30 million in seed funding. My app is really, really cool. It connects to your Git repo and runs a bunch of sort of common linting rules, and then automatically generates some code review comments. I built the entire thing off open source code. I didn't have to write any linting code myself. It's great. I've relied on the open source community to do most of that work for me. However, my primary investor has just left me a very angry voicemail and says that I have to meet with the lawyers first thing on Monday. Can anyone spot from my requirements.txt the mistake I've made? So what I've actually done, you may not have realized this, but PyLint is GPL code. You cannot use PyLint, you cannot incorporate PyLint's code into your project in a functional way. You can use it as a tool to analyze your code base, but if you try and build a product off it, then by having it licensed onto GPL, you have now essentially committed to open sourcing your entire project under the same license. So I need to immediately stop using that package or open source my app. And this is sort of leading into licensing risk. So licensing risk is the risk of using code that is not yours to use, and also the risk of accidentally open sourcing your entire project. There is really, this is an easy one to check. Always check the license. There are some licenses that you can probably use. These are known as permissive open source licenses. They include MIT, Apache, ISC, BSD clauses, BSD and 3 and 2 clause. These licenses give you a lot of freedom to use that app, that code in any way you want. You can effectively use it for commercial purposes, for personal projects, anything you like. There's no warranties provided, but you can use it and you can build commercial applications off it. There are some licenses that you almost certainly can't use. Those include the GPL licenses, GPL v2, v3, AGPL, LGPL. These are kind of known as share-alike licenses or viral licenses, and you have certain obligations under those licenses if you use that code. And for those licenses, usually that you release the code under the same license. The Creative Commons licenses can be permissive, but you have to look at the detail. Every Creative Commons license will have a certain list of suffixes after it. Some of those are permissive and some of them are not. The ones that I've listed there, Creative Commons Share-alike has the same issues as those GPL licenses. CCNC means non-commercial. You can use that code, but only for non-commercial purposes. And CCND means no distribution, which means that you can look at that code. They've released it so that people can see how things work, but you are not allowed to use that in any way. Finally, if there is no license provided on a project, you can usually see this by looking for a license file in the repository. If that license, if there is no license file, you cannot use that code. That is considered all rights reserved. There's a link to a GitHub README there, which I highly recommend for reading up on open source licenses. So next, and this goes back to that first case study I presented, the security risk. So this is primarily the risk of security vulnerabilities. It's the risk that an app will contain code that, while not malicious, it does contain some vulnerabilities that could open up your project to attack. It also includes the risk of packages that are in fact malicious, like matplotlib, and the risk of previously benign packages becoming malicious due to a changeover or someone taking over that project and inserting malicious code. So what are some positive indicators? What are some things to look for to indicate that security risks are being mitigated on a project, on an application? So first point, regular activity, and this is going to be, you're going to see this one across all types of risk as a good indicator. You want to make sure that people are actually regularly committing code to that package. Look at the commit history, look at the release history. It's actually very important to look at the release history as well as the commit history, because if they are committing every day but they haven't had a release in 3 years, that doesn't really help you very much. But a package that's being actively worked on is less likely to have security vulnerabilities because people are actually looking at the code. Similarly, high popularity, which you can look at the GitHub stars, although they can be misleading, and PyPI downloads, look and see how many other people are using this package. There is some level of safety in numbers. It's not absolute safety, but it's a good start, because other people might be attacked first, or there might be more people, more scrutiny on a package that's very commonly used. Active community, and this is kind of separate to activity, but active community means, is there a good set of contributors who are looking into a project? Is it not just like one guy? Do they have a sort of a diverse set of people, of eyes looking at this project to spot things that one person could miss? Some more specific security related things. Do they have a rapid response to vulnerabilities? If people report things on their GitHub issues, or if it's a bigger project, do they have CVEs raised against them? How rapidly does that team respond to those vulnerabilities? Look for a responsible disclosure policy. So this is a policy that's usually advertised on a project homepage or on a GitHub repo, basically giving instructions for how to report particular vulnerabilities without putting them onto a public issue tracker so that bad actors can see them. And lastly, and these are pretty rare on open source projects, but great if they have them, but third-party assessments and penetration tests are awesome. Some bigger projects will have them. They will go out to third parties and say, can you take a look at this code, look in detail in this code and see if you can spot anything. And they will usually advertise those on a project homepage. Some negative indicators, so some things that not necessarily like deal breakers, but things that can raise the risk of security risks. If a package is doing high-risk activities, so examples here like payment processing, authentication, cryptography, anything to do with cryptocurrencies, that means that package is more likely to be targeted in an attack. So any vulnerabilities in there are more likely to be found and exploited. So do a careful review, consider how the package does what it does. Some high-risk activities can be hidden in the background. So really do a deep dive onto just think hard about what those packages are actually doing, and whether there is anything in there that's likely to be dangerous. Large attack surfaces. So these are apps that are doing inherently risky things in terms of like calling system functions, or for instance Django is a great example of a package with a large attack surface. It has web processing, all the stuff that we've seen, handling HTTP requests, cookies, authentication, cryptography. All of these things are avenues that bad actors would really like to target. So you expect a higher level of governance and security and testing on projects that have those sorts of attack surfaces. So moving on to maintenance risks. This is the risk that a package will degrade over time, that it won't be maintained, that it'll be difficult to bring in-house if it does fall out of maintenance. Activity, popularity, and community are really important points here. I'm not going to go over them again, but basically if a package is really is actively maintained and popular and has a great community, then there is far less risk that it will not be maintained in the long term. Some more specific things, backing by organizations. If it has funding or there are a lot of big organizations that are using that, it's a really good sign. If they have financial support, which is sadly very rare in the open source community, but if there is financial support, then it means that the development is likely more sustainable. Also, if an app has a package has evergreen functionality, which is very self-contained functionality that's unlikely to change over time, examples being algorithm implementations, or if it's if it's passing a protocol that hasn't changed since the 1980s, then if it hasn't been updated in a few years, then look, it's probably fine. And some negative indicators there. If it's only backed by one organization and completely owned by one organization, then you should be looking carefully at that organization's track record for maintaining things. It's not a guarantee. If it's open source now, it's not a guarantee it will always be open source. So be very careful if you're using X organizations, I shouldn't say X, Y organizations package, because there's no guarantee it'll be supported tomorrow because your organizations are fickle. Also look for packages with a really high support burden. If it's very complex functionality, rapidly changing subject matter, if they're depending on external APIs that change rapidly, then the burden on those on the developers of that package is likely to be higher. There is a greater chance that they might burn out if they don't have the necessary supports in place. So finally, and this is kind of the trickiest one, but quality risks. Risks that the package won't perform as advertised, it'll be buggy, might be difficult to work with, or it'll force you into bad practices in your code. Again, activity, popularity, community, really good signs. But look for project governance. If you can't actually dig deep into the code because you don't have that level of experience of looking through Python code, look for the governance processes. So look for, do they have detailed release notes? Do they have really good, solid documentation that's easy to read? Do they have formal deprecation policies? Like, look into Django's deprecation policy for a really fantastic example of how that should be done in a project with great governance. And lastly, look for test coverage. A test suite is a great indicator that those developers actually are working in a professional way and really care about their work. Negative indicators, really you just have to dig into the code and have a look, but that's tricky. Go and if you need, go out and reach out for help, ask senior developers and other people in the community to have a look at a package and see what they think of the code. Does it conform to best practices, etc. So I've covered a lot of indicators there. Luckily, there is a really helpful tool out there called Sneak Advisor. Sneak Advisor is essentially a database of every PyPI package out there, as well as actually NPM packages and Rust packages and Go packages. And you can type in any package that's on PyPI and it will give you a report like you see here. These reports cover a lot of all the things that I've just talked about. In particular, activity and community licenses. It will have a big warning if something is in a non-permissive license. It'll give you graphs of popularity over time, commit frequency, releases, and it will coalesce all of that into a score. So you can see Django scores very well, 96 out of 100. And it gives you helpful badges up in the top right that tell you where particular packages might fall down or what you should be aware of. So I highly recommend, if you're looking at packages, type them into here, have a look and see what it says. So finally, if we're looking for alternatives to packages, let's say that you don't like a package, it does an unacceptable risk profile. How do we find alternatives? So my first point, the first Google result may not be the best option. Google results are fickle. And they will frequently give you the thing that you search for. If you search for Django React Date Picker, it will give you some package called Django-React Date Picker. It won't tell you that you should be integrating. You should be thinking about those things entirely separately. Do a back to basic search. Look for lots of different keywords. Do searches on PyPI, look on DjangoPackages.org, which has been a long-running, fantastic resource that tells you, gives you matrix views. If you give it a particular topic, then it will give you a view of a whole lot of different packages that do that job. Ask around, ask on forums, go to conferences, go to conferences and meetups and talk to people. Finally, how do we mitigate risks? Every package has some level of risk. most packages will fail at least a few criteria. Even good packages die eventually, and sometimes only one package does the job and it hasn't been updated since 2013. But we can manage that risk to some extent. First off, licensing risk. There's not a whole lot you can do here. I recommend asking the developers nicely to change the license. This has worked for us in the past. Sometimes developers, especially developers who are new to open source, will look for an open source license, see GPL and say, yes, that's the one, because it's an open source license, and not really understand the ramifications. So filing a support ticket and asking nicely if they could change it to a permissive license can be a good option. If that doesn't work, talk to a lawyer. There are some ways that sometimes that you can integrate that code, but you have to be extraordinarily careful with how you structure it, and it really needs a lawyer involved. So generally avoid if you can, but otherwise your company's lawyers may help. Mitigating security risk. Supply chain scanning tools. These are really handy. They will look through all of your requirements and give you advice on tell you if there are any security vulnerabilities on particular packages. A great free one is Dependabot, which is free with GitHub. There is also Safety, which is free for non-commercial use. That's a command line, Python command line application that you can run on your requirements. There's also Sneak, which run that Sneak Advisor platform. They are very expensive, but they're also the industry leader in the area. Perform careful code review. Commission penetration testing if you have budget. You can host your own package repository to avoid packages being swapped out under you. And just generally having a good security posture on all of your servers, on all of your development machines, install virus scanners, do all the things you should be doing for organizational security. Mitigating maintenance risk, pay your open source developers. Financial contributions are the best way to keep packages maintained. If you can't pay for your packages, contribute to open source projects in kind. So contribute code, set up your organization to be able to contribute back to the open source community. Support the work of development collectives like Jazzban, which is a group of developers who collectively maintain particular packages. And if all else fails, you can always vendor a package and maintain it yourself, but that has its own bundle of risks involved. And finally, quality risk. This is one of the most difficult ones. But pinning your dependencies, if you believe that a package might be sort of prone to changes between minor versions, etc., or there might not be the best governance practices in place, pin those dependencies and watch them like a hawk. Code defensively and write wrapper code to contain madness. So broad accept statements as much as Pilot will be annoyed. Make sure that you're capturing everything that can go wrong in a project in an architectural sense. And make your own contributions to help out the maintainers. Be the change that you want to see in the world and make code better. My 3 key takeaways: know your project's risk profile. Make sure you understand how much risk you want to take. Stop and think before every single pip install. And plan for the long term. Plan for maintenance. Plan for what your app will look like in 5 years. Contribute back to the open source community and make sure that these packages are maintained long term. And finally, watch out for typos. Thanks very much.
Thank you for that, Evan. We do have a couple of Discord questions, but we've probably only got time for one of them. Are you okay with answering the Discord ones after and a live one now?
Yep.
Excellent. So people on the internet, you heard him. He will be replying on Discord, but for the people in the room, one lucky person can ask one lucky question. Here we are, the lucky winner, the wonderful person in the very well-matching mask.
Thanks. Just about the licensing compatibilities. So you had quite a list of the share-like licenses, but this is a Django con. So we build websites. We don't distribute code. We run the code on our servers, and people access it. So pretty much all of the licenses there listed are for code that is being distributed, except AGPL. AGPL was created specifically for servers, for services, so that if you use GPL, if you use that code to run a service on a web server, then you have to make that code open source. The others you don't have to worry about because you're not distributing the code.
So was there a question there?
Am I wrong?
Ask your lawyer. I'm not going. Basically, my advice is don't get into, like, when it comes to GPL code, whether it be any of the variants, don't take any of it for granted. Be extremely careful, and you might be able to use it in your application, but it depends very much on the subtleties of the particular license involved. There is no real good catch-all. Yes, you can absolutely use this if you're building a web application. So yeah, basically ask your lawyers, get approvals from the people who really know this stuff. I'm not an expert on that. I tend to just go with, if it's permissive, great. Otherwise, look deeper, ask a lawyer.
Let's thank Evan again for his wonderful talk.